Hey YouTube, in this video I'm going to talk about why I don't necessarily think that the United States is the best country for retirees. And some of you may be wondering already, you're a young person, what do you know about retirement? Well, I was raised by my grandmother who's now about 89, and she's retired since I was little, and basically since I was around the time I was born even. And not only was she retired, but I was also around a number of her friends that were retired. So I have quite a bit of experience with people that are retired. Not only that, I have some friends that are of that age that are retired. And I think I'm qualified to speak on the subject. So why do I think that the United States isn't necessarily the best place for retirees? Well, first off, it's a very expensive country to live in. Even if you live in some of the cheaper, more rural areas, there's a number of fixed costs that are going to be pretty high. You're going to be paying a premium for rent. You're going to be paying a premium for transportation. You're going to be paying a premium for food. And these things can only be addressed so much. You know, for example, if you are wanting to have a car in retirement, you're going to have fixed costs for car maintenance, for gasoline. These types of things are just simply not going to shrink. Same with rent. You know, you may want to rent a decent place in a quiet area. Well, a decent place is not going to be cheap. You know, maybe you can find a rundown old building. You know, that's assuming you don't own property that will, be okay. But if you want a decent place to live, if you want a quiet place to live when you're retired, you're a little bit older, maybe you have a shorter ability to tolerate stress, it's going to be expensive. Likewise, food, you know, if you want to eat decent food, that's going to be expensive. And these things are not getting cheaper. They're not certainly not going to go down in price. And so keep in mind that if you're looking to retire in the States, these fixed costs are expensive. Now, alongside that, your healthcare and your medications are going to be expensive. Now, some people do have health insurance. They're fortunate that the health insurance will subsidize some of these things. But if you don't have great health insurance or your health insurance is simply not that strong, you may be paying a premium for services and medications that are much cheaper in other countries, much cheaper, because in the United States, we have the highest healthcare costs in the world. So you're paying the highest possible price for a lot of different things. I mean, I've compared prices for certain things. I needed a certain antibiotic, and I was in Cambodia, and I think I paid like $2 a pill. In the United States, that same antibiotic was like somewhere between $100 and $130 a pill. Same exact medication, probably imported from the same pharmaceutical manufacturer in China. But, you know, in the United States, you have these extreme fixed costs that people cannot negotiate. You can't go to the grocery store and negotiate the bill of your groceries down. You can't go to your landlord and negotiate your rent down. You can't go to the auto manufacturer and negotiate the price of parts down. You can't go to, you know, the guy that does your car maintenance or the gal that does your car maintenance and ask them to accept a lower wage. A lot of these things are not cheap, and they're not getting cheaper. With inflation, they're going to continue to rise at the least 3% per year. Now, in many cases, in the last 5 years or so, in some parts of the country, like where I'm from, rents have doubled, or rents have close to doubled. So presuming, 3% is not always the case. Things may go up drastically in cost, and if you're on a fixed income, you're going to feel like you're sinking. Kind of moving on to another fixed cost, if you're looking to get rid of your car, you're looking to have a vehicle-free lifestyle, understand that any city where you can make it without a car is going to be expensive. I don't know of any cities that are cheap where you can rely on effective public transit. Now, will you have some in some of these cheaper cities? Maybe you'll have a bus system, a small bus system, but even that, it may have an inconvenient schedule where you're standing around waiting 30, 45 minutes, an hour for a bus. And if you're an older person, you may not have the energy and tolerance to stand around and say cold weather or hot weather to put up with this kind of weight. So keep in mind that if you're looking for a city with good public transit, you're not looking to drive. While you may be paying a premium for rent and food and other goods to make up for that. I noticed that when I lived in the Bay Area, some people can make it without a car, but in turn they're paying a lot more for everything else. So the savings differential may not be as great. Same with New York. I haven't lived in New York City, but kind of a similar thing in New York City, where yes, you may be able to live without a vehicle, but the cost savings may not be as great as you anticipated because you're paying more for a lot of other things. And also, some of these big cities, there's more pressure to spend on various lifestyle upgrades, niceties, entertainment, this type of experience. So keep that in mind. Moving on to the next point, older people can somewhat be discarded in the United States. And what I mean by discarded, well, after they've stopped serving a purpose at their place of employment, they may just not fit in anymore, for lack of a better way to say it. I know several people that are middle-aged and older that have children, but because of a challenging job market, their children have moved hundreds or thousands of miles away from them, and it's very expensive and time-consuming for them to visit. Not only is it expensive and time-consuming for them to visit their kids, but it's also expensive and time-consuming for their kids to visit them. So just because you might say, "Oh, I've got kids and they'll take care of me," and this and that, they may not be able to do that. They may not have the money or the time to look after you in retirement. So they may have to somewhat discard you, not necessarily intentionally, but just because the United States is an expensive country. There are definitely still challenges relating to finding jobs locally. You may not be qualified for a local job young people may not be qualified for jobs that are available locally, so they may have to move to several cities away or even across the country to find opportunities to where they can earn their own money and have it independence and perhaps move further along being an adult themselves. So it's not as simple as to say, well, I'm going to be fine, I've got family. Well, family sizes are shrinking, and those members of the family that are around may have to make lifestyle changes that don't include you to look out for their own best interest. And kind of beyond that, older people can be regarded as out of touch, old news, even somewhat of a liability. Like, oh, I don't want to take responsibility for this older relative because, if something bad happens, I'm going to get the dirty looks. If they get into, if for some reason they have a health issue and they become more reliant upon me, now I'm trying to carry this weight and it's their views on politics or life are so out of date. They're not aware of computers and technology. How are we going to relate when so much of my job is based around computers and technology, and they're resistant to these changes? Because that's been an issue even within my own life with some of the older people in my life is they're very anti-technology, and I have to point out to them, there's no job that's available that pays well today that doesn't involve technology of some kind. There's no way I can just tell potential employers, "Oh no, I don't use technology. I'm just afraid of that." And there's this, butting of heads that happens because some of these older people hate the changes that technology has made to society. And I'm not disagreeing with what line of thinking. I'm not disagreeing with the idea that technology may have had a negative impact on society. But when it comes to getting a job and making money, I do not have a choice. I do not have a choice in needing to make money. I do not have a choice in needing to pay bills. And so I have to adapt. And there is a sort of a disconnect sometimes with young people and older people in our society about social changes. So that's something to keep in mind, is that not only are some older people discarded by young people, but they're also sometimes their mindset is at odds with the mindset of some younger people. So another point, this is kind of a dark one, but your family may want your resources. I know in the case of some retirees, and particularly like friends of the family, there have been pretty heavy conflicts surrounded around money. There's this entitlement that some of the younger generations have, and even some of the middle generations have, toward the resources and the money of the older generations. And so there have been even some instances where the people in the younger generations will ignore health concerns and problems of some of the older generations, with the mindset that if I just leave it alone, they'll move closer toward the end of their life, and then I'll get a big payday. Now, I don't feel this way. I think it's despicable. I think it's disgusting. I think that we should respect not all older people, but many older people for the contributions that they've made to society. I think that people are entitled to live as long as their bodies and minds will naturally allow them to, of course, with modern medical help as well. But not all young people feel this way. Not all middle-aged people feel this way. Some wish that their older relatives would hurry up and move on to the afterlife because they want the big payday. And I've seen this dynamic in a number of families, not just this family or that family, not just families with kids or without kids. Even if you don't have children, in many cases, you probably have at least one or two relatives that seek to benefit from your loss. So keep in mind that in the United States, because it's an expensive country, because there is a lot of greed in this country, that being a wealthy retired person can make you somewhat of a target. Next, we live in a litigious society. So what do I mean by a litigious society? In the United States, lawyers and suing people are almost a national pastime. I've been sued. I've had friends that have been sued. Even young people, young people get sued. And if young people with almost no resources get sued, I imagine that older people that are presumed to have more resources will become more likely targets of legal action. So keep in mind that you may have worked your whole life. You may have saved up a sizable nest egg. You may own your own home. You may have a fair amount of resources, but because of this, some people will sort of target you to attempt to attain some of these resources. They may make up some kind of issue, or they may, engage in dishonest issue. They may do something wrong and claim it was your fault to try to drum up legal action. There's a classic quote unquote slip and fall type falsehood that a lot of people in the United States, not a lot, but like a substantial number of cases of people have been caught where they essentially pretended to be injured so they could, file a lawsuit. And so keep in mind that having resources and being retired and being older can put a target on your head, not just from family members and relatives and friends that are looking for a payday, but also from strangers. If a stranger becomes aware of the fact that you have extra resources, then they could very well claim that you've done something wrong and then demand money for it. And we live in a society where there's very little barrier to entry to legal action. Many lawyers, if you don't have the money to hire them, will work pro bono. That is, they'll work for a percentage of whatever winnings that they get from the system. So keep in mind that, lawsuits, even frivolous, are often taken seriously, and the court is willing to hear them. In line with the litigious idea, keep in mind that you may become the target of scammers. I mean, it is a nationwide problem that the elderly people are the targets of scammers. They are the targets of rip-off and con artist type people. Not only via the most obvious one, the telephone, hey, I'm blah blah blah. I'm your grandson's friend, and he needs money for blah blah blah. But also just even like as simply as being in a parking lot. I mean, my grandma dated a guy for a long time and things didn't work out with him, whatever. That's aside from the point of this question. But he was at a grocery store, and a guy came up to him and knocked on his window and said, "Hey man, open your trunk, blah, 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 there's an issue." And he wasn't thinking clearly and opened his trunk, and the guy reached in, grabbed a briefcase which had some money in it, and ran off and just dipped out and left. And now he was, this elderly gentleman was out all of the contents of the briefcase. So keep in mind that not only are there other types of, there are other reasons that you may be targeted, but there's also people that look at you as frail, as weak-minded, as not all the way there, and it can make you the target for robbery or ripoff or disingenuine people that think that you just don't have all of your mental faculties and that you're just an easy target. Kind of in the similar fashion, my grandmother had some construction done on her home, and some of the people involved attempted to rip her off. There was, a certain rubber piece that was attached to a sink, and they used an old rotting piece of rubber. I mean, another individual looked at it, a professional, and said, "Hey, did you know they use this really old material and charge you full price for a new one?" She had no idea. So keep in mind that, just because you're in the United States, just because you're from the United States, you've lived there for a long time, there have been a lot of social changes in the United States that lead to some really problematic situations. And I think these are just some of the things that you need to keep in mind if you're thinking about retiring in the United States. So next, if you're looking at assisted living or if you're looking at a nursing home, keep in mind that the staff may resent you. So especially if you're having some physical or mental health challenges, some of these staff members simply are not paid very well compared to local cost of living, and they may very well resent you. They may not like dealing with you. They may not like that you have physical or mental ailments. They may not like the fact that they perceive that, oh, well, they know that you're spending X amount of money to stay at this facility every month, and they imagine in their head, wow, this person has so much more money than me, and I just don't like it because I work really hard for a relatively small wage, and they don't work, and yet they can afford to pay this big bill. So keep in mind that in the United States, we don't always, the culture doesn't necessarily respect elderly people like in other parts of the world. So you may be in a situation where you're the victim of resentment and negative and bitter attitudes, simply based on differences. So kind of the next point, I think this is a really good point. You can't necessarily trust people in your community regardless of how long you've lived there. So I know a number of people between the ages of, say, 50 and 80 that have lived in the same community for 50, 60, 70, 80 years, their whole lives, that have no friends, that have no relationships, that have basically nobody that they can count on or rely on, that they aren't paying paying their paycheck or giving them money. And so that's worth considering, that you may think, well, I've lived here my whole life, and then you look around and you realize most of the people that you've known have, maybe many of them have passed away. When my grandmother talks about it all the time. She's had at least a half dozen friends, close friends, that have all passed away to various illnesses and sicknesses. Two, moved away. Some people end up moving away. One of her close friends moved down to another state, about, I think, over 1,000 miles away to enjoy retirement life. So keep in mind that just because you live in one community, it doesn't guarantee that the other people that you get along with and you like in your community are going to stick around. People move. People get sick, they pass on, they move. There's People change too. Just because you've known somebody for a long time doesn't mean you can necessarily count on them. I mean, I've had a couple of friends that I had known for 10, 15 years that went down the wrong road. Now I can't trust some of these individuals anymore. So keep in mind, just because you live somewhere for a long time does not mean that place is going to stay the same. Doesn't mean the people are going to stay the same. Doesn't mean that it's going to continue to provide fulfilling and satisfying relationships for you. I know a lot of older people that are relatively isolated that just don't have a sense of community, even those with children. This is a real concern for people counting on retiring happily in the United States. Finally, I know some older people, they enjoy having younger friends. They feel like it's stimulating. It keeps them fresh. It keeps them young. Keeps them in tap with new ideas. Keep in mind, a lot of young people, in this expensive country, have to work a lot. They're not going to necessarily always have time to spend with friends, regardless of the situation. I mean, even me as a young person, I have a number of friends that I rarely see, not because I don't like them, not because I don't enjoy being around them, but it's not uncommon for my friends to work 50 hours a week, 55 hours a week. And after working that much, you're going to just come home and go to bed, basically, maybe not go to bed, maybe you have dinner and you watch some TV, but it's not, after working that much in a day, especially, if you're working a good job where you're getting a decent wage, it's going to be taxing. It's going to be mentally taxing. You're not going to have the mental energy to do what you want to do. And then on weekends, you're probably recovering. You're probably just taking time to yourself to recover from the work week. So just because you have friends that are younger that you feel like you can mentor somewhat, they may not always have the time to engage in that relationship. I'm not even talking about the amount of time that they would put towards, say, a significant other or pets or family members, etc. Simply just trying to keep up with their job. So, these are some of the reasons why I think that it's worth considering retiring in other countries. Is retirement in other countries perfect? Certainly not. There are challenges and disadvantages of retiring in other countries. As you get older, you may find it a harder time to learn a new language. You may not want to change up your diet too much. You may not like the change in climate or weather. You may have, even with these challenges I've mentioned, you may have family in the States or whatever country that you're from that you want to be close to and spend a lot of time with. It's not as cut and dry as just don't retire in the United States, retire somewhere else. But I want to discuss some of the disadvantages, because I think some people, they assume that retirement's going to be great, it's going to be perfect, they're just going to enjoy their days and drink drink coffee and relax and enjoy their time. And it's not necessarily that cut and dry. I've known a number of people, and I'm going to talk about this more in other videos, that they did all the right things. They did all the right things. They worked hard, they saved money, they were honest, they lived, generally good lives, lives with integrity, and yet they're still suffering for various reasons. And so this is really something to consider is, how do you want to spend the rest of your time? If you are an older person, what are the things that you're looking for? What are your values? What's your budget? I think these things are important and worth considering. So thank you for watching. I'm Alex Conley. If you enjoy this video, you want to learn more about different options, different ideas surrounding expat life, advantages, disadvantages, check out my channel, and I will see you all soon.